The candles were my mother's. Ivory tapers, slightly warped from decades in the attic, giving off that particular scent of old wax and dust that always made me think of her hands. How she'd set the table for Easter, for Thanksgiving, for every ordinary Sunday she decided to make sacred. I hadn't lit them in years, but Vanessa insisted. "It's a special dinner," she'd said that morning, her smile stretched tight as a drumskin. "A family dinner. Let's make it beautiful." Beautiful, yes. The dining room did look beautiful that October evening. The oak table gleamed with polish. The china, my mother's china, the set with the tiny blue forget-me-nots along the rim, caught the flicker of those old candles. Outside, the maples on Maple Ridge Lane were shedding their leaves in slow, lazy spirals, and the last light of autumn poured amber through the windows. And there sat my daughter-in-law, wearing a cream silk blouse and a smile that didn't reach her eyes, pouring red wine into my glass. Her hands were trembling. Not much. Not enough for Derek to notice. My son was too busy cutting Lucas's chicken into tiny pieces, making airplane noises, avoiding my gaze the way he'd been avoiding it for weeks. Not enough for Megan to notice either. Vanessa's sister sat at the far end of the table, her phone hidden in her lap, her attention anywhere but on me. But I noticed. 41 years of teaching high school English teaches you to read people. You learn to see the boy in the back row who didn't do the reading, the girl who's been crying in the bathroom between periods, the substitute who's been drinking at lunch. You learn that the body speaks louder than the mouth, and Vanessa's body was screaming. The sweat at her temples, though the room wasn't warm. The way she gripped the wine bottle too tight, her knuckles white. And the way her left hand drifted, just for a moment, toward the sleeve of her silk blouse. I saw the vial, small, amber glass, the kind you'd find in an old medicine cabinet. It caught the candlelight for just a fraction of a second as she palmed it, and then her thumb was on the stopper, and her hand was over my glass, and something that wasn't wine was sliding into the red. She thought I was watching Derek. She thought I was distracted by my grandson's laughter, by the clatter of silverware, by the ordinary music of a family dinner. But I have spent 62 years learning that the people who love you and the people who want to destroy you often sit at the same table. Sometimes they're even the same person. I said nothing. Vanessa set the bottle down. She reached for her own glass, clean, untouched, safe, and raised it toward me. "A toast," she said, and her voice trembled like a branch in a storm. "To your health, Eleanor. You've worked so hard for this family. You've given us so much. You deserve to rest now. Rest." The word hung in the air between us, heavy as a stone. I looked at my son. Derek's eyes were fixed on his plate. His fork moved through his mashed potatoes in slow, aimless circles. He knew. Maybe not the details. Maybe he'd convinced himself it was just talk, just Vanessa venting, just stress about money. But he knew. And he was going to sit there and let it happen. My own son. The boy I'd nursed through fevers. The boy I'd taught to ride a bike in the driveway of this very house. The boy who'd cried in my arms when his father died, who'd promised me that he'd always take care of me. He couldn't even look at me. "Gamma!" Lucas's voice cut through the silence. "Gamma, my truck!" His little red fire truck had slipped from his fingers and rolled under the table, coming to rest near Vanessa's chair. She sighed. Loss of composure, irritation at the interruption, and bent down to retrieve it. And in that moment, God gave me a gift. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Her eyes below the table's edge, her attention on the toy, the candles flickering. I reached across and switched the glasses. Mine to hers to mine. My hands were steady. 40 years of writing on chalkboards, of grading papers, of holding my husband's hand as he took his last breath. My hands had learned to be steady when steadiness mattered. Vanessa emerged with the fire truck, handed it to Lucas with a distracted smile, and turned back to me. She raised her glass again. "To family," she said. I lifted the glass she'd prepared for me, the one now sitting in front of her, and smiled. A real smile. The first real smile I'd felt in months. To family, I echoed. May everyone receive exactly what they have prepared for others. She didn't catch it. How could she? She was too busy watching me, waiting for me to drink, waiting for the poison to begin its slow, invisible work. So I drank, and she drank. The wine was a Merlot, nothing special, a $12 bottle from the grocery store. But I have never tasted anything sweeter. 10 minutes passed. Derek told a story about a client at work. Megan laughed at something on her phone. Lucas made his fire truck climb mountains of mashed potato, and Vanessa's face began to change. First, the flush, a creeping redness in her cheeks that could have been the wine. Then, the hand at her chest, subtle at first, a brush of fingers against her collarbone. Then, the gasp. Her eyes went wide. Her glass slipped from her fingers and shattered against the edge of her plate, red wine spreading across the white tablecloth like a wound. "Vanessa?" Derek's voice was sharp, alarmed. "Vanessa, what's wrong?" But Vanessa wasn't looking at Derek. She was looking at me, at my glass, at the empty glass that should have been hers. And then at my face. I leaned close enough to smell her perfume, that cloying, too sweet scent she always wore, like gardenias left too long in the sun. Close enough to see the terror blooming in her eyes. "Is the wine bitter, dear?" I whispered. "I saw you add the extra spice. I simply returned the gift to its owner." She opened her mouth. No sound came out. "You said I deserved to rest, Vanessa." I straightened, reached for my napkin, dabbed the corner of my lips. "But it looks like you're the one who needs a long nap, behind bars. Next time you toast to someone's health, make sure your own heart can handle the poison of your envy." Megan was screaming. Derek was fumbling for his phone. Lucas was crying, confused, clutching his fire truck. And I sat at the head of my mother's table, surrounded by the wreckage of my family, and thought, this is not how the story ends. This is how it begins. Let me tell you how I got here. 3 months before that dinner, I fell down the stairs in my own home. At least that's what everyone called it. A fall, an accident. The kind of thing that happens to women my age, living alone in houses too big for them, stubbornly refusing to move into those active senior communities with their bingo nights and their beige carpeting and their smell of disinfectant and resignation. I remember the morning clearly. A Tuesday in late July. The air was thick and wet, the kind of Connecticut summer humidity that makes your lungs feel like they're wrapped in damp cloth. I'd been upstairs sorting through Harold's old clothes, 5 years gone, and I still hadn't finished the job. Every time I opened his closet, I'd find myself sitting on the edge of the bed, holding one of his flannel shirts, breathing in the ghost of his aftershave until an hour had passed and I'd done nothing but cry. That morning, I'd finally made progress. 3 bags for Goodwill. 1 box of things to keep, his watch, his reading glasses, the tie he wore to Derek's wedding. I was carrying the first bag downstairs when I heard a sound behind me. A footstep, soft but distinct. And then a hand, small, quick, pressed against the center of my back. I didn't fall. I was pushed. The stairs in that house are original to 1952. Hardwood, steep, unforgiving. I tumbled down 8 of them before my body cracked against the landing wall. The pain was extraordinary, a white-hot explosion in my hip, my wrist, my ribs. I lay there gasping, staring up at the ceiling, listening to footsteps retreating through the kitchen. The back door opened and closed. By the time I managed to drag myself to the phone, by the time the ambulance arrived, by the time Derek and Vanessa rushed into the emergency room with their pale faces and their "oh my God, Mom" theatrics, whoever had pushed me was long gone. But I saw her. Just a glimpse in the hallway mirror as I fell. A flash of dark hair, a familiar profile, a face I'd seen across Vanessa's Thanksgiving table for years. Megan. I didn't say anything. What could I say? Your sister-in-law pushed me down the stairs? With no proof? With Derek already looking at me like I was a fragile antique he didn't know how to handle, so I kept quiet. And when Vanessa insisted really, with that particular sweetness that felt like sugar poured over broken glass, that I come stay with them while I recovered, I said yes. I said yes because I wanted to understand. I said yes because even then, some part of me knew that the fall was not an accident, and the truth was hiding somewhere in that house. The guest room they gave me had been Harold's study once, back when Derek was a boy and we'd visit for holidays. Vanessa had redecorated it in shades of gray and white. Modern farmhouse, she called it, which as far as I could tell meant everything looked like it belonged in a hotel lobby. The bed was comfortable enough. The window looked out over the backyard, where Lucas's swing set sat rusting in the summer rain. But it didn't feel like family. It felt like storage. The first week, I told myself I was imagining things. The locked door to the home office, probably just where they kept important documents, tax records, private things. The way Vanessa's phone buzzed constantly, and how she'd leave the room to answer it, her voice dropping to a murmur I couldn't quite catch. The way Derek seemed to shrink whenever I entered a room, finding excuses to leave, to check on Lucas, to take a call that wasn't ringing. "He's just stressed about work," Vanessa told me one evening, her hand on my arm, her smile perfectly calibrated. "You know how he gets. Don't take it personally." But I am his mother. Everything about my son is personal to me. The second week, I started paying closer attention. I noticed that Vanessa never left her purse unattended, that she deleted her text messages immediately after reading them. I saw her do it once, her thumb moving with practiced speed. That she and Derek never argued in front of me, which might sound like a blessing, but after 40 years of marriage, I can tell you, couples who never argue in front of others are either saints or liars, and Vanessa was no saint. I noticed that my coffee, which Vanessa so kindly brought to my room each morning, had started to taste strange. Metallic, bitter beneath the cream and sugar. I began pouring it into the potted fern by the window when she wasn't looking. The fern died within 2 weeks. I didn't tell anyone. I just stopped drinking the coffee. The third week, my sister Patricia came to visit. I heard her car pull into the driveway, that old blue Buick she'd been driving since Clinton was president, the engine rattling like a box of bones. I sat up in bed, reached for my robe, prepared to make my way downstairs, but Patricia didn't come upstairs. I heard the front door open. I heard Vanessa's greeting, bright, warm, familiar, in a way that made my stomach tighten. I heard laughter, the clink of glasses, the scrape of chairs in the kitchen. I waited. An hour passed, then 2. I could hear their voices rising and falling, punctuated by silences that felt deliberate, careful. Once, I thought I heard my name. But the walls in these newer houses are thin and deceptive. You hear just enough to know you're being discussed, never enough to know what's being said. Patricia left without coming to see me. My own sister. The woman who'd held my hand at our mother's funeral, who'd called me every Sunday for 30 years, who'd stood beside me at Harold's grave and wept. She drove 45 minutes to visit my daughter-in-law, and she didn't climb 1 flight of stairs to see me. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I crept downstairs on my healing hip, every step a small agony. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I just needed to move, to feel like something other than a prisoner in a guest room full of gray pillows. I found it in the kitchen trash, buried beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. An envelope, ripped open, then crumpled. The return address was a company I didn't recognize, Premier Financial Services, but the words stamped in red across the final notice inside were clear enough. Amount due, 47,892. Status, collections. Action required immediately. Vanessa's name was at the top. I smoothed the paper against the counter, read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the pocket of my robe. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in that gray room, watching the shadows of the maple tree shift across the ceiling, and I thought about debt, about desperation, about the particular arithmetic of greed. Vanessa owed someone a great deal of money, and I was beginning to understand what she planned to pay it with. I have never been a spy. I spent my life conjugating verbs, explaining the difference between there and there and there, convincing teenagers that Shakespeare was not, in fact, a punishment invented specifically to ruin their weekends. I graded papers. I made casseroles. I loved my husband, raised my son, tended my garden. But it turns out that 40 years of teaching also teaches you patience. How to wait, how to watch, how to gather evidence before you make your case. The Tuesday after I found that crumpled bill, Vanessa announced she was taking Lucas to a pediatric dentist appointment in Hartford. Derek was at work. He was always at work now, or at least that's what he claimed. Megan had stopped coming around, perhaps sensing that her role in my accident made her presence awkward. I had the house to myself. The office door was locked, but the lock was a simple interior model, the kind you can pop with a flathead screwdriver or a sturdy butter knife. Harold had taught me that trick decades ago when Derek was a toddler and kept locking himself in the bathroom. I stood outside that door for a full minute, my heart pounding against my ribs, telling myself I was being ridiculous, paranoid, a silly old woman jumping at shadows. Then I thought about the dead fern, the metallic taste, the hand on my back. I opened the door. The office was smaller than I expected. Just a desk, a filing cabinet, and a computer that hummed softly in the corner. The walls were covered with Vanessa's real estate awards, those gold-plated plaques they hand out for selling enough houses to qualify for some meaningless club. But the desk told a different story. Bills, dozens of them, stacked in uneven piles, some opened, some still sealed, all of them marked with the same red warnings I'd seen in the trash. Past due, final notice, account referred to collections. I began to sort through them, my hands trembling despite myself. Credit cards, $62,000 across 4 different accounts. A personal loan from a company called Quick Cash, $35,000 at 29% interest. A second mortgage on the house, Derek's house, the house I'd helped them buy, that Vanessa had apparently taken out without telling my son, $48,000. And then, at the bottom of the pile, a letter that wasn't from a bank at all. Handwritten, blocky letters, no return address. You have until October. After that, we take what we're owed, one way or another. No signature, no specifics, just a threat, naked and absolute. I did the math in my head. 62 plus 35 plus 48, plus whatever other debts were hidden in drawers I hadn't opened, at least $180,000, probably more. And October was 3 months away. I took photographs. I'd brought Harold's old digital camera, a clunky silver thing he'd bought in 2008 and never learned to use properly, and I captured every document, every threat, every damning number. My hands shook. The flash kept misfiring. But I got the evidence. Then I put everything back exactly where I'd found it, locked the door, and returned to my gray room to think. The answer came 4 days later. I was in the upstairs hallway, making my slow way to the bathroom, when I heard Vanessa's voice drifting up from the kitchen. She was on the phone, nothing unusual there, but then I heard another voice, not on the phone, in the room. Patricia. I froze, pressed myself against the wall like a character in one of those spy movies Harold used to love, held my breath. Can't keep waiting, Vanessa was saying. These people don't wait, Patricia. They've already made threats. If I don't have the money by October, you'll have it. My sister's voice, calm, certain. The voice of a woman who has already made peace with what she's about to do. We've discussed the timeline. The medication is untraceable. It mimics a heart attack perfectly. Everyone will assume it was natural. She's 62, living with grief, under stress. No one will question it. Like Harold, Vanessa said. My heart stopped. Like Harold, Patricia agreed. Except this time, you'll have control over the will. She told Derek everything goes to him, right? 50-50 with any surviving spouse? That's what she said last year. I made sure to ask. Good. Then we stay the course. The dinner is set for late October. A family gathering. A toast. And by November, your debts are cleared, and I get what should have been mine 30 years ago. I couldn't breathe. Harold. They were talking about Harold like his death was. No, I wouldn't let myself think it. Not yet. Harold had died of a heart attack, natural. The doctor said so. Everyone said so. But Patricia had been there that night. She'd brought a bottle of wine to celebrate his retirement. She'd poured his glass herself. I sank to the floor of that hallway, my hips screaming, my chest full of broken glass, and I pressed my fist against my mouth to keep from screaming. My sister, my husband, my life. I wanted to run downstairs, to claw at Patricia's face, to demand answers, confessions, some explanation that would make sense of the senseless. But I didn't, because I am not a fool. And confronting them now would only give them time to adjust, to cover their tracks, to find another way to finish what they'd started. If I was going to survive, if I was going to make them pay, I needed to be smarter than my grief. That night, Lucas asked me to read him a bedtime story. Vanessa was in the shower. Derek was downstairs drinking whiskey and staring at his phone. The house was quiet except for Lucas's small voice asking for "Good Night, Moon." The same book I'd read to Derek 35 years ago, the pages soft and furred with love. "Gamma," Lucas said, halfway through, his head heavy on my shoulder. "Is Great-Grandpa Harold in heaven?" I turned the page, the great green room, the red balloon. The quiet old lady whispering hush. "Yes, sweetheart. He's in heaven. Will you go to heaven too?" I looked at his face, his father's eyes, his mother's chin, but something else underneath, something that was purely and entirely him. 6 years old, innocent, unaware that the woman who made his breakfast each morning was planning to murder his grandmother. "Not for a long, long time," I said, and I meant it. After he fell asleep, I went to my room and took out a leather journal I'd brought from home. It was meant for recording recipes. Harold had given it to me one Christmas, a gentle joke about my terrible cooking. The pages were blank. I sat on the edge of that gray bed, and I began to write. July 23rd, pushed downstairs, saw Megan in the mirror. August 4th, coffee tastes metallic, poured into Fern. Fern, dying. August 12th. Found debt notice, 47,892's, Vanessa's name. August 16th. Photographed office documents. Total debt, 180,000 plus, threats included. August 20th. Overheard Patricia and Vanessa. They killed Harold. They plan to kill me. October. I closed the journal, and I began to plan. Margaret Chen had been my lawyer for 23 years. She'd handled Harold's will, the refinancing of the house, the trust we'd set up for Derek when he turned 18. She was 70 now, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, working out of the same cramped Hartford office she'd occupied since Reagan was president. The kind of woman who still typed her own letters and distrusted anything that required a password. I took a cab to see her, told Vanessa I had a follow-up appointment with my orthopedist. She'd offered to drive me. Of course she had. She wanted to monitor my every move. But I insisted. "I need to feel independent," I said, letting my voice quaver just slightly. "You understand?" She understood. She thought I was a foolish old woman clinging to dignity. She let me go. Margaret's office smelled like old paper and lemon furniture polish. She sat behind her mahogany desk, reading glasses perched on her nose, listening without interruption as I told her everything. The fall, the coffee, the debts, the overheard conversation. Harold. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor," she said finally, "have you considered going to the police?" "With what?" "A crumpled bill and a conversation I overheard through a door. They'll think I'm a paranoid old woman." "Derek will think I'm a paranoid old woman, and then Vanessa will know I'm on to her, and she'll find another way." "So what do you want to do?" I'd thought about this for 2 weeks. played it over and over in my mind during those long gray nights in the guest room, listening to the house settle around me, wondering if every creak was a footstep coming to finish the job. "I want to change my will," I said, completely. I explained what I wanted. If I died of natural causes, genuine natural causes, confirmed by an independent autopsy, the estate would pass to Derek as originally planned. But if there was any suspicion of foul play, any irregularity, any question at all, everything would go to a charitable trust, the Eleanor Mitchell Foundation for Public Education. Not a penny to Derek. Not a penny to anyone in my family. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That's comprehensive. I want them to know that killing me gains them nothing. I want it in writing, ironclad, untouchable, and I want you to send a copy to Patricia Holbrook and Vanessa Mitchell the moment I die, before the funeral, before the tears. Let them read exactly what their greed has cost them. Margaret studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "I'll have the documents ready by end of week," she said. "Eleanor, please be careful." "Careful?" I almost laughed. "Margaret, I've been careful my whole life. Look where it got me." The birdhouse had been a gift from Lucas. He'd made it at summer camp 2 years ago, a lopsided wooden thing painted blue and yellow with a crooked hole and his name scratched into the bottom in wobbly letters. It had sat on the dining room shelf ever since, too ugly to display prominently, too precious to throw away. Vanessa had tried to move it to the garage once. I'd quietly put it back. Now it would serve a different purpose. The camera was smaller than I expected. I'd ordered it online. Harold had taught me enough about computers to manage that much, from a website that promised discreet home security solutions. It arrived in a plain brown box while Vanessa was at a showing. I spent an hour figuring out how to turn it on, another hour positioning it inside the birdhouse so the lens peered through the entry hole. The angle was perfect, the entire dining room table captured in high definition. I tested it obsessively, recorded myself sitting at the table, drinking tea, pretending to read. Watched the footage on my laptop, checking the clarity, the sound quality, the timestamp in the corner. It worked. It would work. And then I began to play my part. It wasn't hard, really. Vanessa already believed I was declining. All I had to do was lean into it. I let my hands tremble when I held my fork. I asked the same questions twice, 3 times, watching Vanessa's eyes light up with barely concealed satisfaction. I forgot to take my medications, the real ones, the ones that actually helped, and let myself look pale, tired, old. "You're worrying me, Mom," Derek said one evening, his voice stiff with performance. "Maybe we should talk to Dr. Patterson about options." Options, nursing homes, hospice, getting me out of the way before I became too much trouble. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I said, patting his hand. "Just tired. It's been a difficult year." I watched Vanessa smile into her wine glass. She thought she was winning. She had no idea. 3 weeks before the dinner, Derek came to my room. It was late, past 11. Vanessa had gone to bed early, claiming a headache. Lucas was asleep. The house was so quiet, I could hear the October wind scraping branches against the siding. Derek stood in my doorway, his face half-shadowed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. He looked like he had when he was 16 and had crashed the car into the mailbox, guilty, scared, desperate to confess, but terrified of the consequences. "Mom," he said, "I need to. I wanted to." I set down my book, waited. He stepped into the room, closed the door behind him, sat on the edge of my bed, and for a moment I saw my little boy again, the one who used to crawl into my lap during thunderstorms, who believed I could fix anything, protect him from anything. "Mom, I'm worried about you," he said. But his voice was wrong, too rehearsed, too careful. "Worried how?" "Just your health. You seem so tired lately." And Vanessa said, he stopped. Vanessa said what? He couldn't meet my eyes. His hands twisted in his lap. I could see the war inside him, the part that wanted to warn me, to tell me everything, battling against the part that was too weak, too compromised, too deeply entangled in his wife's web. This was his chance, his moment. All he had to do was speak. "Nothing," he said finally. "Just take care of yourself, okay?" He stood, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the knob. I wanted to scream at him. "Tell me, be my son, choose me, just this once, choose your mother over your wife's lies." But I didn't. "Derek," I said quietly. He turned. "I love you. I want you to remember that. No matter what happens, I love you." Something flickered across his face. Pain, maybe, or guilt, or the ghost of the man he could have been. "I love you too, Mom," he whispered. And then he was gone. I sat alone in that gray room, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. I understood now. He wasn't going to save me. He wasn't brave enough, or strong enough, or honest enough. If I was going to survive, I would have to save myself. I reached for the calendar on my nightstand. October 7th. I circled the 28th in red pen, the date Vanessa had chosen for her special family dinner. 3 weeks. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks to ensure that when Vanessa raised her glass to my health, she'd be drinking her own poison. I turned off the lamp and let the darkness hold me. The morning of October 28th, I woke before dawn. The house was silent. Through my window, I could see fog rolling across the backyard, swallowing the swing set, erasing the world in slow white waves. It felt appropriate somehow, like the universe was holding its breath. I lay in bed for a long time, watching the darkness soften into gray. I thought about Harold, about the night he died, how Patricia had poured him a glass of wine, how he'd complained of heartburn and gone to lie down, how I'd found him 2 hours later, already cold. I'd spent 5 years believing it was fate, bad luck, the cruelty of a body that simply gives out. Now I knew better. Today, I would make them pay for that. For him. For me. For every morning I'd woken up alone in a bed that still smelled like his aftershave. I chose my clothes carefully. The navy dress I'd worn to Derek's college graduation, classic, dignified, the kind of dress a woman wears when she wants to be remembered. My mother's pearls, cool against my throat. Sensible flats because I needed to be steady on my feet. No perfume. I wanted to smell nothing but the truth. When I came downstairs, Vanessa was already in the kitchen. "Eleanor, you look beautiful." She turned from the stove, her face flushed from the heat, an apron tied over her silk blouse. The kitchen smelled like roasting chicken and rosemary, like warmth and family and home. "I'm making your favorite, lemon herb chicken. Remember, you said it was the first meal you ever cooked for Harold?" I remembered. I'd told her that story years ago, back when I still believed she loved my son, back when I thought she might become the daughter I never had. "How thoughtful," I said. My voice didn't waver. The doorbell rang at 4. Patricia. I watched from the living room as Vanessa opened the door, as my sister stepped inside with a bottle of wine. Red, of course, always red, and an embrace that lasted too long. They murmured to each other, words I couldn't hear, and then Patricia looked up and saw me. For a moment, something flickered in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? Or just the cold calculation of a woman making sure her investment was still breathing? "Eleanor." She crossed the room and kissed my cheek. Her lips were dry. "You look well." "Do I?" I smiled. "Vanessa's been taking such good care of me. Hasn't she just—" We stood there, two sisters who had shared a womb, shared a childhood, shared the grave of our mother, and one of us had murdered my husband and was planning to murder me. I wanted to wrap my hands around her throat. I wanted to weep. Instead, I offered to help set the table. Dinner began at 6. The dining room glowed with candlelight, my mother's candles, those ivory tapers that Vanessa had insisted on. The table was set with the forget-me-not china. Everyone had dressed up. Derek in a blazer he hadn't worn in years, Megan in a dress that showed too much collarbone, Lucas in a tiny bow tie that made him look like a miniature waiter. We sat, we smiled, we performed the rituals of family. "This chicken is incredible, Vanessa," Patricia said. "You've really outdone yourself." "I wanted tonight to be special." Vanessa's eyes flickered to me. "A celebration of family, of everything we have." "Everything you're about to steal," I thought. But I nodded and cut my chicken into small, careful pieces. The conversation drifted. Derek talked about a client, some corporate merger I couldn't have cared less about. Megan showed Lucas videos on her phone, keeping him distracted, keeping him quiet. Patricia asked about my health with the tender concern of a woman planning my funeral. And I watched Vanessa. I watched her refill wine glasses, everyone's but her own, which she barely touched. I watched her check her phone under the table, her thumb moving in quick, nervous strokes. I watched her eyes dart to the clock on the wall, counting down the minutes. At 7:15, she reached for the wine bottle. "Eleanor," she said, "let me top you off." I held out my glass, smiled, let her pour, and I saw it. The movement was subtle, practiced even. Her left hand drifted to her sleeve as her right hand tilted the bottle, a small amber vial, no bigger than my thumb. A quick press of the stopper, a tiny stream of liquid disappearing into the red. She set the bottle down, raised her own glass. "A toast," she said. Her voice trembled, nerves or excitement I couldn't tell. "To your health, Eleanor. You've worked so hard for this family. You deserve to rest now." The table fell silent. Derek stared at his plate. Patricia smiled. Megan's phone buzzed, and Lucas dropped his fire truck. 3 seconds. That's all it took. The truck clattered to the floor, rolled under the table, came to rest against Vanessa's chair. She sighed, loss of composure, irritation, and bent to retrieve it. I moved. My hand crossed the table, glass to glass, a simple switch, so fast, so smooth, that even Patricia, watching me, always watching me, saw nothing. Vanessa emerged with the truck, handed it to Lucas, turned back to me with that predator's smile. "To family," she said, raising her glass. I raised mine, the one she'd prepared for me, the one now sitting in front of her. "To family," I echoed. "May everyone receive exactly what they have prepared for others." We drank. The wine was cheap and slightly too warm. But as I watched Vanessa swallow, watched the poison she'd meant for me slide down her own throat, I thought it was the finest thing I'd ever tasted. 10 minutes passed. The flush came first, a creeping red across her cheeks, then the hand at her chest, pressing against her collarbone, then the gasp. Her glass shattered against her plate. "Vanessa?" Derek's voice was high, panicked. "Vanessa, what's wrong?" But Vanessa wasn't looking at Derek. She was looking at me, at my empty glass, at her own trembling hands, and then at my face, calm, steady, utterly unmoved. I leaned close. Close enough to smell her perfume, that rotting gardenia sweetness. Close enough to see the terror blooming in her eyes. "Is the wine bitter, dear?" I whispered. "I saw you add the extra spice. I simply returned the gift to its owner." She tried to speak, couldn't. "You said I deserved to rest, Vanessa. But it looks like you're the one taking a long nap, behind bars." I stood, walked to her purse, hanging on the back of her chair. Found the empty vial in the inside pocket, she'd been too confident to dispose of it, and held it up to the light. "Derek," I said, my voice cutting through Megan's screams. "Call 911. Tell them your wife has been poisoned. Tell them to test her blood for digoxin." Derek stared at me, his face white. "Now, Derek." He fumbled for his phone. Patricia was frozen in her seat, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. I turned to her. "I know about Harold," I said quietly. "I know about everything. You'll want to call your lawyer tonight, Patricia. You're going to need one." The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. I handed them the vial. I told them what it contained. I watched them load Vanessa onto a stretcher, her eyes rolling with terror, her hands clutching at empty air. And I felt nothing but the cold, clean satisfaction of justice. The hospital waiting room smelled like burnt coffee and antiseptic. I sat in a plastic chair the color of old teeth, watching the clock on the wall tick past midnight. Somewhere down the hall, behind doors I wasn't allowed to pass, doctors were pumping Vanessa's stomach and flooding her veins with whatever antidote existed for the poison she'd meant for me. She would live. I'd made sure of that. The paramedics had arrived quickly, and I'd told them exactly what they were dealing with. I wanted her alive. Death would have been too easy, a quick exit, a closed case, a funeral where people would cry and call her a tragedy. No. I wanted her to stand in a courtroom. I wanted her to hear the charges read aloud. I wanted her to spend years in a cell thinking about the toast she'd made to my health. Derek sat beside me, his elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He hadn't spoken since the ambulance left, hadn't looked at me, hadn't done anything but shake. Patricia had been taken in a separate car, not an ambulance, a police cruiser. I'd given the officers her name, told them about the conversation I'd overheard, suggested they might want to reopen the investigation into my husband's death. The detective who took my statement was young, serious, and very interested in the photographs on my old digital camera. "Derek," I said finally. He didn't move. "Derek, look at me." Slowly, he raised his head. His eyes were red, swollen, empty. He looked like a man who had woken up to find his entire life was a lie, because it was. I reached into my purse and pulled out my laptop, opened it, pressed play on the video file I'd saved that morning. The dining room appeared on screen, captured in perfect clarity through the birdhouse camera. We watched together as Vanessa poured the wine, as her hand slipped to her sleeve, as the vial emptied into my glass. We watched the toast, the swap, the drink. We watched Vanessa collapse. Derek made a sound like a wounded animal. "I have more," I said. I pulled out the leather journal, the photographs, the printouts of Vanessa's debts. "I've been documenting everything for 2 months. The police will have copies by morning." "Mom," his voice cracked. "Mom, I didn't know she would actually. I thought it was just talk, just stress. I never thought, but you knew." I kept my voice steady. "You knew something was wrong. You knew she was planning something, and you said nothing." He couldn't deny it. The truth was written across his face, carved into the lines around his mouth, drowning in his eyes. "Your father," I said quietly. "They killed your father, Derek, Patricia and Vanessa, 5 years ago. The wine she brought that night, it wasn't a celebration. It was murder. The sound he made then wasn't human. It was grief and horror and shame, all compressed into a single broken howl that echoed off the waiting room walls. He slid from his chair to the floor, his body curled like a child's, and he wept. I let him weep. He had earned those tears. 2 weeks later, I drove to Derek's house. The driveway was empty. Vanessa's car had been impounded as evidence. The lawn was overgrown. The windows were dark. It looked like a house where something had died, which I suppose it was. A marriage, a family, a lie that had lasted 12 years. Derek answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt that hadn't been washed in days. He'd lost weight. His beard was patchy. He smelled like whiskey and regret. "Mom." His voice was hoarse. "I didn't think you'd come." Neither did I. I stepped inside. The house was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, toys scattered across the floor, mail unopened on the counter. Lucas was at school. Derek's neighbor had been helping with pickups and drop-offs while Derek fell apart. We sat in the living room, on the couch where I'd once watched Lucas take his first steps. The silence stretched between us, heavy and full. "The charges came through yesterday," Derek said finally. "Attempted murder for Vanessa. Conspiracy and accessory to murder for Patricia. They're reopening Dad's case." He paused. Megan's cooperating. She told them everything. The fall, the plan, all of it. They're offering her a deal. Good. The prosecutor wants me to testify. He looked at me then, his eyes pleading. Against my own wife, against your sister. They want me to stand up in court and tell everyone how I knew and did nothing. And will you? The question hung in the air. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. Whether Derek was truly my son or just a coward wearing my son's face. He closed his eyes, took a breath. Yes, he whispered. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. I owe you that much. I owe Dad that much. I reached out and took his hand. It was trembling, but it was warm, alive. That's not enough, I said. Testifying is the minimum. If you want to be my son again, if you want to be Lucas's father, a man your boy can be proud of, you need to do more. Anything. Tell me. Therapy. Real therapy with a real professional for as long as it takes. You need to understand how you became the kind of man who could look away while his wife planned murder. And you need to change. He nodded, tears streaming down his face. And Derek? I squeezed his hand. You need to forgive yourself, eventually. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. Because carrying this guilt forever won't bring your father back. It will only destroy you. He broke then. Not the violent shattering of the hospital waiting room, but something quieter, softer. The kind of breaking that comes before healing. I held my son while he cried. 6 months later, spring came to Maple Ridge Lane. I was back in my own home, the colonial with the wraparound porch, the creaking stairs, the garden where Harold's ashes were scattered beneath the roses. The room still echoed with emptiness sometimes, but it was a peaceful emptiness now. The emptiness of a house that had survived its storms. Derek's car pulled into the driveway at noon. Lucas tumbled out first, racing across the lawn toward me, his arms outstretched. Gamma! Gamma! Look what I made at school! He thrust a piece of paper into my hands, a crayon drawing of a house, a garden, 2 stick figures holding hands. Me and Gamma, he'd written at the top in wobbly letters. It's beautiful, sweetheart. I kissed his forehead. Why don't you go play in the garden? The butterflies are out today. He ran off and Derek approached slowly. He looked better, clean-shaven, rested, something like peace beginning to settle behind his eyes. The therapy was working. The testimony had been brutal, but he'd done it. He'd stood in that courtroom and told the truth, and Vanessa had been sentenced to 15 years. Patricia to 12. How are you, Mom? He asked. I'm alive. I smiled. That's more than they planned for. We stood together on the porch, watching Lucas chase butterflies through Harold's roses. Mom, Derek said quietly, I'm sorry. I know I'll be saying that for the rest of my life, and I know it'll never be enough, but I'm sorry. I know you are. I took his hand, squeezed once. Let's go inside, I said. I made lemonade, and I think it's time for a toast. He looked at me, uncertain. I smiled, a real smile, the first one that had come easily in a long time. To family, I said. The real kind, the kind that's earned, not inherited. The kind that chooses each other every single day, even when it's hard. Derek's eyes filled with tears, but he nodded. To family, he whispered. We walked inside together, leaving the door open behind us, letting the spring air fill the rooms where so much darkness had lived. Lucas's laughter drifted in from the garden, bright and clear and full of future, and for the first time in years I felt like I was home.